Hello, thank you everyone for joining us on Sheleads today. And we've got a very exciting session today because we are recording jointly with the ALTHAN Co Women's Forum. And today our guest is Rosalind Singleton, CEO of Spring Fibre. So thank you for joining us, Rozs.
That's a pleasure, Lydia.
Thank you. So Rozs, our guest speaker today, I'm not going to say too much around her, but I'm just going to say quickly, she wears so many hats in the tech industry. Rozs is the chair of UK 5G alongside being CEO of Spring Fibre, but I'm not going to ruin her introduction by going through her impressive resume. And I'm just going to welcome you, Rozs, and say, tell us about you and the amazing career you've had to date so far.
Thank you, Lydia. That's very kind. And I have to say, I never think those things about myself. so it's very nice of you to say them. Yeah, so as Lydia says, I'm the CEO of Spring Fibre, which is a fibre to the premise startup. Basically, it's, for want of a better way of describing it, construction, digging holes, putting in ducting and laying fibre in it. I'm also the chair of the UK 5G Advisory Board, which is a body set up by government to promote the use of 5G in the UK. And that's coming to the close after 4.5 years in September, with hopefully some significant achievements. I'm also a non-executive of a silicon IP business that floated on the London Stock Exchange last year. I'm on Ofcom Spectrum Advisory Board, and I do a couple of bits for other advisory, not least with one of my favorite things in the world, which is a group called Angel Academe, which is an angel investing group. Our diversity target is 30% men. And we basically invest in female founders, primarily in tech businesses, ideally B2B. At the moment, we do a lot of fintech and health tech type investing. And I have to say, I really love the angel investing. It brings me into contact with lots of amazing young people, most of whom are women, actually, because of the way we select our cohort, and also teaches me about stuff I just don't come across in my day-to-day life. Like, you know, for example, I've been invested in blockchain since about 2017 or 2016, I think. So that's a little bit about what I do at the moment. By background, I've been in telecoms mainly for 30 odd years. I started out, my very first job, I was a tea lady. I used to push a trolley around a company, and I sort of worked my way up from there. And I was very lucky to be at what is now O2. It was called Cellnet back then, but it was a great environment to learn in. I got to move through lots of different departments. I had loads of people who were very happy to explain to me what things like multiplexers and other mysterious devices are in networks, and I have to say that's stood me in good stead ever since.
Yeah, thank you, Rozs. And I guess just to bring the conversation to that, when we met at Relish Networks, which became UK Broadband and then part of Three, you were, I believe, the CTO then with Nick James. And in our conversation the other day, I was just saying how much growth has happened with you from when I met you to your current position as the CEO of Spring Fibre. So I just want to understand how that journey happened for you, because I think from my perspective, being an outsider into your journey, it just seemed like lots of amazing things, and it sort of seemed to me like your career skyrocketed sort of overnight from that point. So could you tell us how that happened?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say luck plays a big part in anybody's career journey, and anybody who believes otherwise is probably very, very arrogant, I would say. And unless, you know, you're in something where you literally get blind scored on everything, but unless you're in an orchestra, that generally isn't true. So I would say I was incredibly lucky to land at UK Broadband. I was in a job I didn't very much enjoy before. But what I would say is I've spent a lot of my career doing a lot of different things, and had spent probably around 20 years of it in sort of IT telecom. So very specifically, you know, covering end-to-end IT. And ultimately I ended up being something called a business architect, when that was a fairly new definition, if you like, of a career, which is basically somebody who puts together people, processes and systems to make ways that businesses can achieve their strategic and tactical aims. So I'd done a load of consulting and those sorts of things before moving on to this other business I didn't like very much. I'd also been at a very wide variety of telcos. So a lot of my consulting was at places like Vodafone and Barty. Previous to that, I'd been at, as I said, O2, BT Openreach, and well, a wide variety of other telcos of varying sizes. So when UK Broadband came and found me, effectively, I was literally thinking about just going consulting, which would have been the most lucrative thing for me. But they offered me the opportunity to start an IT team. The job started off really small. So basically, what would you do with this IT team? But I loved my interview so much that I really liked the people. And effectively just thought, well, I just want to go and work with these guys, right? It'd be great fun. And there wasn't really much of a business then. There was 70 people, but it was still a very patchworky business. At the time, we were launching a brand, Relish, which is a consumer broadband wireless proposition in London, or was rather. It's now, 3 broadband. But as we moved along, I got given more and more responsibility. So I started off being about, just doing some IT, operational IT, and then I got given all the IT development, and then eventually they asked me to run the network as well, and I became the chief operating officer, which meant I looked after most of the stuff that runs things on a day-to-day basis, building it and then making it run properly eventually, which is about the time I think that Lydia and I met. And when the company was purchased, they asked me to be the managing director. I mean, like I say, it's just a series of lucky events, I suppose. I wouldn't say it's all luck, though. There's a degree of competence behind it. And my old boss, Nick, who Lydia mentioned earlier, used to say that one of the things he liked about me was, I wasn't in his office all the time. If he heard from me with a problem, it was a real problem. And I think there's a degree of competence, perhaps, that he found useful. And I don't really like politics or drama. And I always, previous to becoming like the managing director of the business, I always used to describe myself as an excellent sidekick, because actually, finding somebody I work very well with and then helping them achieve what they want to achieve is something that actually I always enjoyed very much, particularly because it puts you a little bit out of the limelight and gives you more focus on actually getting the work done.
Yeah, no, that's excellent, Roz. And in your journey, did you find on that path to leadership that you had to change your mindsets at any point to be able to do the things, so assuming more responsibility from chief operating officer to MD? Did you find that a shift in your mindset was necessary to enable you to take on those responsibilities?
Well, this is interesting, Lydia, because we've never had this conversation. But yeah, I think I changed a lot, and I don't know how visible it was. But I came previously. I felt the business was quite hard-edged about lots of things, and when I moved, I assumed I would continue like that, because that was very much, if you like, the culture. A management team is very much like any other team, will tend to have a prevailing culture to a degree, even though there are tensions and politics and those sorts of things. And one of the things I did find is actually I'm much more people-oriented than I thought. I always thought I was very task-oriented because, I'm sort of IT, and to be honest, I'm not massively keen on, that many people. I don't like lots of very close physical contact and those sorts of things. So, I always thought I wasn't, but it turns out actually, there are two things. One is it's nicer to run a company where people like each other and act like they do. And the other part of it is, it's really obvious when you think about it, but actually, people need to be successful. It makes us all happy. What we want is to be, no matter how old we are or how young, we generally want a degree of autonomy, i.e. to be able to make, decisions ourselves. And we want to be able to achieve things because that gives us a sense of satisfaction, regardless of what you do. I mean, it sounds silly, but there have been jobs I've had, like I used to clean a training center, for example. I had a limited degree of control over where I went, but the quality of the work I did and how I felt about it was actually a little bit in my control. And I've had other jobs where that was much less the case. I didn't have control over the quality of work I did or how I felt about it. And actually, I have to say, one is somehow weirdly more satisfying than others. Though being a chambermaid was never satisfying anyway. That's just horrible. But anyway.
Oh, thank you, Roz. So over the nearly 30-year span of your career, was it a deliberate choice to end up where you are now?
If you'd asked me when I was 14,
Yes.
When I was 14, me and my best friend at school used to talk about, by the time we were 27, we'd be CEOs and married with a couple of kids, and all those sorts of things, which, now seems hilarious and rather fanciful. As my career went along, when I first started, I was very, very ambitious. I went my way up a certain amount of things quite quickly. I targeted things I wanted to do, like I really wanted to be a project manager. So I ended up actually being an accountant for a while, because really good solid knowledge of finance will help you be a better project manager. And I used to do those sorts of research and things. But over time, what I realized is the jobs I enjoy are what makes me happy. And you have to kind of, I think, get to a certain salary level before you can be comfortable doing that, because actually there's a basic need to, be able to provide what you need to provide in life. But once you get to that point, I think it's a lot easier to focus on what makes you happy. And so it's not that my ambition went away, it's just that it wasn't level oriented. And to a degree, it's still not that level oriented. When I started getting the fancy pants job titles again, and these aren't enormous jobs, UK broadband was 120 people or thereabouts most of the time. But the fancy pants job titles come with status, and I've discovered I really like status. I enjoy the trappings that come with it. But I've learned that about myself, and I've also learned, or I like to think a little bit, to try and take that to one side and say, actually, is the work itself enjoyable and satisfying? Because actually, that's, at the end of the day, that's what really counts. You spend so much of your time at work. It's, if you can possibly enjoy it and you're lucky enough to be able to have those sorts of jobs, then you really should. And so my ambition has moved very much to, I want to learn and work with people I find interesting, and that can teach me things. And that's always something I very much enjoy.
And were there any self-limiting beliefs you had to dispose of to make progress in your career?
There's disposing them and just kind of locking them up in a little box somewhere in the corner, right? And every now and then they wheedle their way out and get into my ears. So I've always thought I was a terrible public speaker. And I've done a lot of it now. And as a woman, because everybody wants women in the line-up, and particularly in telecoms at a fairly senior level, there are a limited number. So I get to punch above my weight a lot, and I've had to get over that. And when I watch myself back, I still sometimes go, oh my God, why are you umming all the time, or whatever it happens to be? But the point is, I'm up there and doing it, and the only way to get better at it is to practice. And at the end of the day, and you'll have heard me say this before, Lydia, nobody's going to die. it's not that bad. So I have a lot of things. I've nearly always assumed I'm the dumbest person in the room, or the person that knows least in the room. And again, over time, you get these little instances. I'm sure you've all had them before. You sit in a room and you're talking about something, and you suddenly realize actually you probably do know more than most of the people in the room and understand the subject better. And it's kind of a surprise, but then you don't want to lord it over them and be all I am. And it's really difficult sometimes to find that balance. One of the young women I'm mentoring at the moment actually has, she doesn't like to speak first. And so she waits and hopes somebody else will make her point, but then everybody thinks, that she's not really paying attention. So, and because they know she knows and they know she's smart, and it's a really difficult position to be in where you don't want to appear arrogant. And I've sort of had to learn to push some of that down a little bit and do things I'm quite profoundly uncomfortable with, in terms of putting myself in the middle of things, particularly, in a room full of what I think of as older guys, but largely actually, I'm 50 now, so most of the time everybody's younger than me. But there's still that thing where you feel like you're in a room full of grown-ups. I have lots of those things. I'm constantly insecure about the way that I look. All the things that I suppose most of us feel most of the time have plagued me. And sometimes you just have to talk sense to yourself, right?
And is that something you still do in terms of managing those feelings and managing imposter syndrome? Has that changed now that you are a CEO and you've got all of the fancy pants title, as you say? Is that something that has gone away?
Yeah, it does a little bit. The other thing is, about I'm going to say 12 years ago, I realized I didn't want to play act anymore. So I used to try and be a grown-up professional, and sort of had a work me and a me, and I realized that I didn't want to do that anymore. So I had a pretty big health problem, and I just thought, you know what, life's too short. I don't want to be a different person. And actually, in a lot of ways, that released me from a lot of things, because I might feel all those things, but at the end of the day, if I'm not trying to live up to an image of something I'm trying to act or whatever, you know, that sort of see it, be it, or, you know, fake it till you make it thing, that just doesn't work for me. And I think I just found a style which worked for me, which is just me being me. And that, if you like, released, that was sort of the start of a huge, the last, you know, 12 years of what, I mean, it sounds like a long time when I think about it, but you know, it feels like I've really come up a long way. And I was actually expecting to just be a really good business architect by now. If you'd asked me what I thought, I would have said I would be a really good business architect. Hopefully it was making a lot of money doing it. So, you know, and I love all that putting together of entire organizations. So it works very well. But yeah, I think that was part of it, is I have a much better idea of who I am. I'm much happier being who I am at work. And I think I don't have to be like somebody else or everybody else. What I do have to be is a decent human being. Really, I only have a couple of really strong principles, but I try to stick very, very, very strongly to them.
And did you find your perspectives changed as you navigated your way through a male-dominated environment?
Yes, I was very lucky when I became the CIO of UKB. It was actually the board, or the senior management team that ran the business was more than 50% female, which was really, really unusual. I was like, goodness. It was really a surprise. But my old boss, almost unconsciously, I think, was actually quite a champion of women. All the people he noticed in the business as being exceptional generally were female rather than male. It was quite interesting. But in everything else, I went to a conference last October for the fibre industry, and there was a point where I was the only woman in the room when I first arrived, and I felt like I was 22 again, because it was like being dumped all the way back, you know, in time to, you know, the very early 90s. And that was so weird. And then another woman turned up, so we talked to each other. But it was very, you know, and it was unusual because it was very white, it was very male. It was slightly better as we went through, but, you know, in terms of speakers, I was the first speaker on the second day that wasn't male, you know, on either day. So first, I had the first slot in the morning, the second day I was first, and I berated people at the conference rather strongly for the fact that, you know, you must be doing something to not have any women here, guys. But it is difficult sometimes, because there are lines that you have to be quite careful about. You worry about things that men will never understand, quite possibly, and certainly some of those guys who are, you know, in a very particular sort of environment are unlikely to understand, I would say, and that you maybe can't talk about. But I'm finding actually it's just better to just talk about these things, and luckily the environment in the last few years makes that more possible. You know, I used to joke about the hot flushes, right? Our company stand-ups. Again, Lydia will remember this, but it's things like that. You know, we have to do our best to normalize things like, you know, menopause as far as possible, and you know, the fact that pregnancy is perfectly normal, but sometimes a bit weird, you know, and all those sorts of things, because it is just part of being a human being, right? And we are more than 50% of the percentage of human beings, so the other people really should just be getting used to us.
Yeah, no, that's right, that's excellent. I want to go back to your career journey at Spring Fibre, because not a lot of people would have heard about Spring Fibre because it didn't exist before you. So I wanted you to tell us a bit more about that journey in setting up Spring Fibre and employing people and really being the boss and visionary of a new company.
Well, I mean, visionary is a strong word. It's a fibre business, right? There are gazillions of them. Literally over 100 registered fibre businesses in the UK today, are doing this thing. They're called altnets, so alternative networks, as an alternative to Openreach and Virgin. So I was brought in by an investment house and some consultants who had started up Spring Fibre and come up with a strategy, and they needed somebody to execute it. So they came and found me. I brought in actually some of our old colleagues from UK Broadband and some other people, and have built a team. We are fundraising, and sorry, there's my windowsill in front of me is wood, touch wood. We are on our way to raising a fairly significant amount of money so we can start digging holes, hopefully in June, the latest July, and get the business moving. So it's an interesting environment commercially at the moment because there are so many businesses, and it's likely to consolidate quite quickly. And weirdly, even though UKB was only, I don't know, 8 years, 7 years or something, I learned a lot. We bought businesses, we sold businesses, we shut businesses, we did all sorts of things. So I think all those skills and experience, plus the angel investing and this process I'm going through now with investment, will turn out to be really useful in the future.
Yeah. Okay. I'm coming to a close of my own questions for the recording. So I just had 2 more questions I wanted to touch on. One was if there are any specific aspects of your leadership journey other women can replicate for success as they progress in their careers.
I suppose the one thing, and you know, this again seems like common sense. The one thing I would say is if an opportunity comes up, is quite frightening. If you're in a position, you know, there's obviously a level of risk everybody can manage in their life, and especially financially, I get that. But basically, if you're just taking a risk because it's outside of your comfort zone, then, you know, do it. There's almost always another job. You know, no matter what it is, there is almost always another job that you can go and do. But if somebody offers you an opportunity that is really interesting, the worst thing that happens is if you fail is you have to go and do this other job that probably won't be any more boring or worse than your current one. So if somebody offers you a really interesting opportunity, do it. If it's extracurricular and you can possibly fit it in, and Lydia is an excellent example of somebody who fits a huge amount in. But you know, if you get an opportunity, and particularly if you think it's a little bit more than you can manage, do it, because you'll find it's not. And actually most other people, I think, are guessing half the time anyway, or just trying to make it look like they are what they are. You know, men get imposter syndrome as well, and I do hear about this quite a lot, and it's fascinating. I think we all worry sometimes that we're not good enough for the jobs we do, but yeah, take the opportunities that life throws you, because you're not going to sit on your deathbed going, well, no, I'm really glad I didn't do, you know, whatever that was.
Yeah, thank you, Roz. And my last question is a big one on pay and opportunities. So there's been quite a lot on LinkedIn, particularly around, you know, what sort of pay brackets should women be asking for? Should women, you know, be paid as much as their male colleagues are paid for the same job and all of that? I just wanted to get your perspective on that gender pay gap debate and all of that. What should we as women be aspiring to ask for when we seek these new positions and a new opportunity? What should we be looking for pay wise?
Well, that's an excellent question. So I mean, the gender pay gap is obviously actually like with many of these questions, a lot more complicated than you know, on the face of it you would have it be. What I would say is, I mean, obviously legally we are entitled to the same pay as men for the same or a similar job, right, with a similar responsibility. But there's a point, particularly as you get later on in your career, where, you know, you can't measure those things and it doesn't quite fall into that category. I mean, you know, do you see some examples of city workers where, you know, their bonuses have been that much lower than that of their male counterparts? They've felt the need to go to tribunal and been very successful doing so, which is great. But I think in various careers, you know, what you can do is different. I've never said I want to earn as much as, I don't know, Johnny or whatever next to me. But the one thing I have learned again in the last few years is, you know, understanding your worth and asking for it is interesting. It's difficult to ask for a lot of money because you feel like you're being really arrogant, and everything in us is to not ask for too much, right? We are brought up that way, or were at least. I don't know if that's still the case, but it's really difficult. But you kind of have to, there's this thing, this Shakespearean phrase, you know, screw your courage to the sticking post. You kind of just have to go, right, I'm just going to go and I'm going to say I want X. And actually what you find is you can get there. So often, you know, you may not see a salary range. I firmly believe in publishing salary ranges with job adverts, and those, regardless of what the job is. There are issues with that as an employer, but, you know, largely it's much better for people who are going to recruit, and you get a much better cohort of applicants. But what I would say is do a bit of research, figure out what other people might be earning and ask for that. I mean, the worst thing anybody can say is no. They could say you're priced out of something. That's the only risk. But, you know, again, in your career, largely most of the time we'll have a good idea what you're worth. I mean, if they asked me to run BT now, I would have no idea to ask, to know what money I would ask for, right? That would take me a really long time to figure out. But, you know, if it's something within your field of knowledge, then I would say, you know, go for it, and always just stop and think, actually, you know, what am I actually worth with these skills and experience? Not what do I feel like I deserve? What am I actually worth?
Thank you, Roz. I think that's an excellent place to draw my questions to a close. So thank you for sharing your thoughts and journey. And I don't believe I spelled out the topic of discussion in the beginning. I'm finding that I always missed it, but we've been discussing Roz's journey, and it's framed around mindsets of a CEO or leadership, if you call it that way. Anyway, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us, Roz.
That's a pleasure, Lydia. Thank you.